game is an amateur game. I mean, the professional side of it, there are idols and heroes and fun to watch them play. But I mean, if it wasn't for amateur golf, there would be no golf.
On a nice day, it's very scoreable. When you go play it on a 15, 20 mile an hour day and you're hanging on to your pants. And I think I love that about that style of golf, link style of golf.
You have to remember, when you play a golf course and you're out there for 4 hours or whatever, you're only hitting a ball for 15 minutes of that. So there's a lot of time to look around.
Welcome back to another Top 100 Clubhouse podcast. I am Jasper Miners, and today I'll be joined by Brian Ross. Now, just before we get into that, I wanted to take an opportunity to explain why Brian and his work at Park Mammoth was so intriguing to me. When it comes to golf course architecture, and especially the big names that we see debuting in some of our rankings and around the world, it's easy to get caught up with pristine sites on sand in amazing locations. What Brian Ross has done is completely different. They've taken an existing golf course on less than ideal land and took an indescript golf course and made it rank number 7 in the state of Kentucky. So today, Brian and I are going to have a wee little chat just about how that came about, what it took, and whether there's the potential for other golf clubs to do the same. Now, the reason why I think this is important is because it offers a real life example, a proven case study of an opportunity for many clubs to reevaluate where they're at, what they're doing, and where they're going. The UK is full of 18-hole golf courses that have 9 amazing golf holes, and then 9 that just don't match it. There's a lot of golf clubs that are struggling to stay afloat. Reinventing itself, or finding a new identity, or pivoting, as some people in the industry would say, is maybe a new norm that a lot of golf clubs will have to consider. But what it means is it doesn't have to actually be the end of the road for the golf club. It can actually be a really exciting new beginning. And hopefully, this might set the stage for some of our listeners, maybe decision makers at golf clubs or courses, to look at what they're doing, to maybe find some inspiration in what they've done at Park Mammoth, and see how Brian Ross has turned an ordinary golf course into something quite special. So a little bit about your background then, like what's been your, and obviously I've read the About Us section on your website, but when it came to actually getting into the industry, getting yourself in a dozer and a digger, what's been the ascendancy? How have you worked your way through that?
Sure. So I started when I was in high school. I was a pretty good golfer, and we get to play some decent courses sometimes in the summer on little local tours and play kind of all over. I grew up in a very rural area of Virginia, very southwest corner of the state. And it didn't have a lot of golf options at all. There was a couple of 9-hole courses. There was one 18-hole course in my entire county. It was about 20 minutes from my house. So it was a challenge just to get into golf in the first place. But I grew up on a farm, so I was always outdoors anyway. And so it was just really, it was an easy connection to make. And so during the summer of my junior year, I was playing some junior tour stuff around Northeast Tennessee, and I was in Knoxville, and I got to play Holston Hills, and that's a Donald Ross course. And that was the first course I'd played where I was just like, whoa, this is just monumentally better than any of these other courses I'm playing growing up. And so I kind of did a deep dive into it when I got home that night, and we had just gotten the internet at that time, and so trying to use that and learn like what is this deal, and I find out there's this guy named Donald Ross who designed this golf course, and I'm like, that's my last name, and my father's name is Henry Donald Ross. I'm like, am I related to this guy? And so just kind of did this deep dive, figured out you could be a golf course architect, and that night I told my parents, I was like, that's what I want to do. And so my dad,
cool. So after one round at a Donald Ross course.
Yep. That was the night I knew. And my father knew some people at Virginia Tech where he had gone to school, and he reached out to them, and they said, well, a lot of people who are golf course architects do landscape architecture, as a major. So kind of started my intention to do that then, and got a landscape architecture degree at Virginia Tech. And when I graduated, it was kind of the financial crisis, all the stock market crash in 2008, of the housing
Great timing.
bubble and all that. And I reached out to every architect in the business, and nobody's hiring. Everyone's downsizing. There's a lot of guys who had just gotten laid off, who are trying to make it work on their own as well. And so I was fortunate to get a job as working golf course construction during that time. So I worked for a contractor, TDI. We kind of traveled, all over the country building golf courses, and just started out mostly. I was just, shooting grades on greens and things like that, just trying to help the project managers. And eventually I got up the courage to ask if I could get in some of the machinery. And my grandfather had a bulldozer growing up, so I'd been on one before. I'd been on a backhoe. I sort of knew, I was driving a tractor when I was 12 years old. So I kind of had a knack for it already. And just all shaping is just, we're just big kids playing with toys. They're just bigger toys. We could do
That's it.
a little bit more fun stuff than we could do when we were 4 and 5. So kind of taught myself how to shape during that time. I would just stay after work on Saturdays and things like that, learn how to operate, learn how to, get the blade on the ground and keep it there, and so forth. And worked for them for a few years. And then actually got out of the golf industry for a couple of years when we first started a family, got married, and had our first son. And my wife was like, no more of this. You can't be gone 28 days a month. So worked for a building architect in Austin for a few years during that time. And that was still useful for me, though. I'm doing landscape plans. So I was, back in AutoCAD doing a lot of the grading and planting and things like that I learned in school. And finally had an opportunity with a golf course architect, Richard Mandel, in the Pinehurst area. So in 2017, went to work for him. Worked for him for a couple of years as his design associate, and really kind of learned the industry, learned how to be a good businessman during that time. And then 2019, just kind of felt like I was ready, wanted to kind of jump out on my own, and so I did it without a project lined up or anything. Just kind of took a leap and said, "We're going to make this work," and that's how it got started.
Very cool. So not long after you launch Ross Golf Design independently, 2019, you get Park Mammoth Golf Club. So relatively new to the game, I guess you could say. And then you get this project. So can you tell us a little bit maybe about what was existing there and the opportunity that they saw and perhaps you saw when you were interviewing for that job?
Yeah. So I'd been in business for 8 months when I first spoke with the ownership of Park Mammoth. And at that time, I was just taking small jobs and whatever we could do. I was doing a couple of small bunker projects. I was collaborating with a guy named Colton Craig out of Oklahoma, and we had done a couple of small projects together. I was living in the women's locker room of this course in rural Oklahoma at the time, and it was winter. It was cold. There's a lot of days where it never got above freezing. We're trying to do this little bunker project. It was just like, man, is this really what I signed up for? This is not much glory here, but it was just another way to get to kind of to stay relevant, stay in the industry, and keep the ball rolling. It was rolling very slowly downhill at the time. But what I would do, on days off or on the weekend, or if it was a rain day or something, I would just spend a lot of time online just researching, like, are there golf courses being sold or people buying golf courses and that kind of thing. And I found an article. These guys have purchased this defunct golf course outside of Bowling Green. I was like, man, that's not terribly far from where I grew up, and seemed pretty interesting. So I just reached out to them like I had done to hundreds of other people, and I might get, 10% might respond, 9% of them saying no, not interested, or don't need an architect, or, we're just going to do some little upgrades in house and things like that. And these guys responded, and they're like, yeah, we'd love to meet you if you're ever in the area. And so, a couple of weeks later, just happened to find myself in Nashville and drove up, made the short trip up to Bowling Green and to Park City. Park City's just outside of Bowling Green. And met with those guys, and amazingly, they hired us on the spot. They're like, yeah, we'll hire you guys to, put together a concept plan And if we like it, we'll move forward. And we're like, oh my gosh, okay. So we put this plan together, and it wasn't a major project. It was just going to be some bunkers, new irrigation system. Um, but the land was really good. It's a really cool setting. It's like a bowl shaped valley, surrounded by this prominent ridge on three sides. You really can't see it from the road. It's just kind of tucked back in there. It's right in one of these little coves that feed into Mammoth Cave National Park. And I just saw so much potential in the land. It reminded me of places like Lasonia and White Bear Yacht Club, just rolling, heaving topography, but all in this like idyllic valley. And so we're like, we got to really come up with something cool and try to wow these guys. And so we put together a concept plan in about 2 weeks, just quick thing, not like a beautiful rendering or anything. Gave it to them, and I'm like, all right, when can we start? And we're like, well, when do you want to start? They're like, right now, today. Like, what can we do today? And the golf course that was there was pretty good. The routing was pretty good, and there were a couple of trouble spots, but for the most part, it was pretty good. But every hole was just lined with cedars and pines, just kind of like your typical low end public golf course in America. Just had been overplanted, and we just basically told them like, hey, if it's green, it goes right now. So they started taking out cedars and pines the next day, just really opening up the views and opening up the whole corridors. And we came back just a few weeks later. So, we met these guys in January of 2020, which already, COVID hadn't hit yet, but it was on the radar. Right? People were talking about, the virus when it was overseas. And so we started the project in March 2020, March 1st, basically we start shaping out there and just adding some bunkers again. Like we weren't blowing up anything. And then, COVID really hit. So it was that weekend in March when things just absolutely ground to a halt here in the U.S. Yeah, all the college basketball tournaments are getting canceled, and flights are getting canceled, and restaurants are closing, and we're just like, oh man, if we lose this project, like this might be we might not have any more work for the rest of the year. This might be it. And Mr. Chandler, the owner, came out the next day and he was like, well, I hear they're shutting everything down. He's like, the good thing is, I own some hotels here in town, so we can keep you up if you'll stay. And he's like, I own a couple of restaurants here as well, so we can keep you fed. And he's like, if you guys will keep going, he's like, I want to keep going. And so we did, and we powered through, and really just that was the only project we had that year. That was the only project that a lot of people would have had that year. And a couple of weeks after that, he came back and he's like, you think it's weird we're pouring all this money into this place, but we're not doing anything to the greens? And I was like, yeah, Mr. Chandler, I was like, be honest, if it were me, I'd do greens and nothing else, because the greens out there were just, again, your typical in the low end public golf, 2,500 square foot ovals, 6 to 8% slopes back to front on every green, just really featureless. They were in good locations generally. It was just really featureless greens. And there's a great quote by C.B. McDonald that I'll paraphrase, but it's basically, if a golf course is a portrait, the greens are the face. And I told that to him, and he looked and thought about it for a second. He's like, let's just redo the greens too. And I was like, whoa, Mr. Chandler, that's going to really bump the budget up, And he's like, we'll make it work.
We'll sort that out.
So we did. Yeah. And that day, so that really opened things up for us. And we could start looking at maybe fixing a couple of those problem spots that I mentioned in the routing, and getting some greens closer to tees, and moving some tees over to create better angles and things like that. And so that really changed the game at Park Mammoth. And I'm so fortunate and thankful that he trusted us, with that decision, and trusted us to keep going after that, because the scope of the project had grown immensely. And I think he just really got bit by the bug and got the itch to make that place as good as it could be, and trusted us to do it. And so, we really put ourselves into it. I spent 220 days there that year out of 365. I mean, I practically lived in Bowling Green that year, and fly home, a couple times a month, on the weekends and things like that. But, and I think it really shows that we put that much of ourselves into it. I think that's why we were able to get it as far as we did.
So just for our listeners, perhaps we'll explain a little bit. So Park Mammoth Golf Club is in Kentucky. Kentucky is basically Midwest United States. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's kind of on the line. I mean, so I think people in Kentucky consider themselves Southern more than
Okay.
Midwestern, but it's right there on the line. A lot of people call that area of Tennessee and Kentucky the Mid South, like
Mid
Northern
South.
Alabama, all that. Yeah, so it's it could be labeled multiple things. I think it's not unusual to hear it be called the Midwest, though.
So if we're thinking about this, probably the major city that people would know is Nashville, Tennessee. You mentioned it already.
Hmm.
If you basically head, well, s- due north, maybe a little bit
Pretty much due
northwest,
north, yeah. Now slightly northeast from Nashville, I'd say
northeast.
it's right off. So I-65, Interstate 65 connects Nashville with Louisville, and so our golf course is basically right in the middle of Nashville and Louisville, about an hour and a half from both.
From both. So you've got two major urban centers, an hour and a
Mm-hmm.
half from Park Mammoth. You've also got
Mm-hmm.
the national park effectively right on your doorstep. Um, and effectively, you have a golf course that's sitting on great land, good land, very good land, somewhere in there between those two things. And
Yeah, I think
basically,
I would call it very good land on the surface and maybe not so good underneath. It's very rocky clay based soil. It wasn't great soil to work with. We weren't able to move much dirt, which was fortunate. We didn't
mhm.
want to anyway, but we weren't able to, even if we had wanted to. But yeah, it's really a really unique piece of property.
Cool. So, I mean, the big things that held it back, you mentioned two things. So, trees, basically lining corridors, and then a couple of green sites that were in awkward positions. So, started with a little bit of tree work, a little bit of bunker, got the approval for greens. Now, the interesting thing that, uh, I mean, that really caught my attention was that for all intents and purposes, there was a handful of things that you sorted out with new green sites, issues with the routing. But for more or less, how many green sites was that that you said like right we actually need to position these completely? I know you rebuilt the majority of them,
Mhm.
but the ones that were really causing issues in the overall golf course.
Yeah, I would say on the whole, we probably moved 2/3 of the greens, but a lot of those movements were say like 15 yards or
Yeah.
30 yards, something like that. Just kind of just moving it down the hole or up the hole and things like that. But the real problem out there was the first hole. The very first hole out there was like a 280-yard par four that had like a 110-degree dog leg. So you'd have to hit this ball out between these two trees that were there's basically a 17-yard gap between these two trees, and you try to hit your ball in that, and then you'd have to basically turn straight left and play this little pitch up the hill. It just wasn't a very good hole. And the next hole was a pretty good hole. It was a downhill par three, and then the next hole after that was kind of an interesting long par four. But we knew we got to fix that corner. And the first thing we did before that was to flip the nines. We felt like the nine that the old first hole was on was the better nine. It finished right in front of the clubhouse as well. So we thought that needs to be 10 through 18, but we got to fix this new 10th hole. Like it can't be what it is. And there was a really good green site right at the base of the 13th green, which basically turned number 10 from a 110-degree dogleg into a more or less straight hole. And it lengthened the hole by about 50 yards as well. But so we decided at that time, like we really liked the green setting for number 13. We're like, why don't we just combine them? So we combined the 10th green in with the 13th green and create this 15,000 square foot double green that serves both holes. And then from there, we turned and played the 11th hole, the par three. We created a short par three that plays back to that original 10th green site. And so basically, we were able to kind of connect those two golf holes by just switching the routing, making a change there. And then we had to clear about a 1 acre section of forest in order to make the tee shot on number 12 work. Because we had basically taken the old tee box for number 12 to make it the tee for 11. And so, we were able to get Mr. Chandler's blessing to do that work. And I think that really opened up everything. And everything else on the back nine was more or less where it was. We did move the 15th green as well. Like we moved that. That was a really awkward golf hole as well because the land was sloping hard from left to right, but the green was kind of tucked back behind this really, really beautiful oak tree. And it was really, really difficult to reach that green because your tee ball is going to bound to the right, and then you've got this tree between you and the green. So we
Hmm.
moved the green on number 15 across a valley and benched it into this hillside, and that was like the one spot on the golf course where it was way too steep for a green when we started. We're like, man, I hope we can do some cutting here. And we cut and like never hit a rock in this one spot. It was like the most
Quite providential.
and that ended up turning into one of the better green sites, one of the better golf holes out there, I think. And and another thing we did was the variety in the par threes. When we started,
Mhm.
there were 3 par 3s that were all like 160, 170 yards. I mean, you just see that all the time. I was just kind of like, everyone wants this kind of mid iron par 3, and then there was one par 3 that was about 200 yards at the time. And when we finished, we've got par 3s now that are from 110 yards all the way up to 240. Some great variety in the par 3s that we were able to create as well by doing some of those minor routing adjustments.
So, I mean, maybe this is a good thing. So, you obviously have like individuals that have, own, or perhaps are custodians of golf courses. Um, and maybe the first point to make is that this is actually why you employ a golf course architect. I remember talking with Mike Clayton, and he said one of the best reasons why you hire golf course architects is to stop you making stupid mistakes. And
Absolutely.
well, whilst that's true, a lot of clubs do spend money and make big decisions and spend ridiculous amounts of money on things that don't necessarily make a huge difference. And maybe your point about rebuilding bunkers, when in fact what you could do is spend a lot more money rebuilding green sites and have you know um, a better golf club overall. Um, but it's knowing where to spend your money, when to spend your money, and what to spend your money on. Um,
Mhm.
so, and also to your point, the fact that effectively you looked at 3 holes, made minor adjustments with regards to opening up corridors. You mentioned those. What was really 3 or 4 really critical decisions that basically opened up the entire site. So, I guess this is, I mean, it's an interesting thing for me because getting permission, especially in the UK now, to build golf courses is increasingly difficult, especially seaside links, just because of triple SI and environmental concerns and the rest of it. And to be fair, there's probably a lot more money to be made building houses. So if you're going to go through to get planning, if you can make development for schools or universities or housing developments, you probably stand to make a little bit more. So now that you've done this project, when you look at like existing golf clubs and courses, do you look at them and say, actually, there's another Park Mammoth Golf Club there waiting to happen? Or is this just that kind of one off golf course that had all the right ingredients that needed a few very basically astute changes to make it in to fulfill its full potential? Or is this something that moving forward we might see a little bit more of?
Yeah, that's tough. I definitely see potential in a lot of these golf courses. Again, I grew up in a rural area that's not totally dissimilar from Park City, Kentucky, and
Hmm.
and there's a lot of golf courses out there that are a lot of just mom and pop shops and that are on pretty good land, and it's just people laid out a golf course. A lot of times it was just the original developer. It was probably just a farmer or something that said, I'm going to lay out a golf course on this land, and so they didn't have they don't have the background. They haven't seen a lot of the world's best courses, and so I think a lot of times there's some missed opportunities in these places that sure you could make them better. The real problem, I suppose, in that is that you have to have an owner with that vision as well, and the resources to pull it off. And we were so fortunate with Mr. Chandler that he could do it himself. He had
Hmm.
the money, he had the willpower to withstand all these changes and not just be like, that's too much. Let's just pull back. Let's pull the reins back. He had all the ingredients necessary to be able to pull it off. And to be honest, it's still a difficult thing to do because we're in a market that where it's difficult to charge over $100 to play golf. All the people who had been playing golf out there since the course was built in the 1960s, they'd been paying $20, $25 to play golf out there, and now you're asking them to pay 100 or more, right? And in order to just to break even, essentially. And Mr. Chandler's always said, he's like, I don't care if this makes money or not. He's like, I just want to break even. That's all.
Hmm.
And and even since we built the golf course, I mean that's not the end of the story at Park Mammoth. I mean, I've worked out there every year since then as well.
Okay.
We opened in 2022 in the spring of that year, and I was back on site already building a new driving range. We had a very small irons only range that was kind of out in the middle of the golf course, right by the clubhouse, and that was the original driving range. So we're like, hey, that's we'll just use that. And the tee box was much too small. It was getting beat up. They were having to use mats most of the time, and so we were looking for a better solution there. So we built a brand new driving range, 350 yards long, 100 yards wide. It's not on the golf course. It's a little bit of a drive and a cart to get down to it, but it's a great practice facility. We built a
Hmm.
couple of practice greens down there as well. And then I was just back again, this past year in 2024, and we just added a 9-hole short course out there as well, and that's set to open in spring of this year, 2025. And so
Brilliant.
he really sees kind of the what Park Mammoth can be. And of course, there's other examples of these places out there that are either renovating or new courses that are opening, and they're doing stay and play and lodging, and they're finding ways to keep people on site for more than just 4 hours. And so we're working toward that. The clubhouse, the first 2 years of operation, they were just operating out of a job trailer, and now they have a beautiful clubhouse with a great kitchen, that fits the site. It's not too big, it's not gaudy, it's not fancy, but it really fits what Park Mammoth is. And every year, Mr. Chandler is looking to do some type of project that can improve the place, and I'm hoping that lodging is the next step. I think it's the next most logical step is to be able to get people there for a weekend. Um,
Well, and he said he's already got the
and
hotels in the immediate area, so he knows what he's doing when
they
it
are,
comes
and
to that.
he is a commercial real estate guy, absolutely, and that's basically his entire career has been. And so I think that was probably part of the holdup at first. He's like, well, we've got all these hotels in Bowling Green, but Bowling Green's still a 30-minute drive. It's not next door, so it's still a bit of a challenge transporting golfers back and forth from there. And I really think because of the setting and because of the proximity to Mammoth Cave and the beauty of that hilly area of Kentucky, I really just think there's an opportunity to get people there and keep them there for a weekend or even a week while they explore the area and play golf as well. And so I'm really hoping that's kind of the next step that the facility is able to take. But it's been a really fun process to be a part of, to kind of see this place, not just the golf course come to life, but obviously it's been great for me because it makes it much easier for me to be back there and playing golf on it, because I'm still there working to this day. And at this point now, I've spent over a year of my life in the last 5 years in Park City, and just excited to get the short course open this spring as well. They've got a lot of
Is that a
excitement
9-hole
from
short
the
course?
people who play. 9-hole short course, yep. So holes ranging from about 75 yards up to 125. Um, based model wise on the Cradle at Pinehurst was kind of the course
Brilliant.
that for me really wowed me when I lived in Pinehurst 2017 to 2019. The Cradle had just opened, and we'd go over there all the time after work and do 2 or 3 spins around. And then it started getting so busy, like you'd be lucky to get around once. Just be waiting in line, like, man, I hope we can get around once before dark. And just seeing the camaraderie and the really fun golf shots and seeing the ball move on the greens and on the ground, it was just a real aha moment for me. I'm like, wow, why don't more places have something like this? And now you see it today. Of course, every dream golf property, they're adding short courses, and sometimes in the same amount as the main courses. They're building them at Bandon and Sand Valley and everywhere. Stream Song added one. So I really love that concept too. Is because a lot of people don't want to go 36 in a day. They don't want to go around twice, but they'd hang around for a couple extra hours, and have a drink and hit some fun golf shots with their irons. And so we're
Eh,
obviously very excited to get that open there.
Yeah, I mean you start to see like not a million miles away. So a couple of things that you spoke about. Sweetens Cove recently has just said that. I mean, that's about 3 hours south. They're going to add lodging on site. They become kind of the darling of the 9-hole short course type thing a couple of years ago. but again, on a site similar to yours, in the sense that an existing golf course that really hadn't seen its full potential, but some probably more major changes there, really to turn it on its head and make it what it is now. But you did that with an 18-hole course, with tree management and green sites. But then I'm just thinking about Brian Schneider's work and Blake Conant's work at Old Barnwell. So obviously you got the big course that's open to rave reviews, but then also this really fun kind of short course, or kids course, where
Yeah, love
you
the
need to
kids
be
course.
accompanied by a kid if you want to play it. So maybe that's the point, is that I think more and more of people like yourselves, and myself perhaps, and a lot of our listeners, uh, we know what we like when it comes to golf because we've probably traveled and seen quite a lot of it. But the more you can get like short grass, the ball running on the grass, and bring the ground game into play as opposed to just an aerial game. And truth be told, like in Scotland, that's pretty much the way it's been, primarily due to links golf, but then also things like the ladies club at St Andrews,
Yeah.
the putting course. Absolutely brilliant little facility. And it's chocka, like you said, just like the Cradle in Pinehurst. You go there on the weekends or after school in the summer. It'd be really difficult, really hard to even get a spot on the putting green.
Mm.
So golf returning to its roots. I mean, the other thing to keep in mind here is that looking at the scorecard for Park Mammoth as well, you've just tipped it at 6,000 yards. It's not a 7,800 yard behemoth off the back tees.
Mhm.
So perfect for a lot of golfers who, I mean, I don't know in the States how popular it is, but it seems like it's gaining popularity. We look at things like hickory golf or persimmon golf here. More and more people are playing that. And the last thing you'd want to
Mhm.
do with a set of hickories or persimmons is to try and take it on at 7,400 yards.
For sure. Yeah, I think Park Mammoth would set up beautifully to play a Hickory tournament. I really think it would. The ground game is there, uh, and and you're right. I mean, we're at 62-15 from the back. Um, that's enough for most people. We're not trying to host an event out there. We've had some really good golfers play Park Mammoth since it opened. JB Holmes is a Kentucky guy, PGA Tour guy. He's played out there. Some Corn Ferry Tour guys. There was a guy who plays on the PGA Tour Canada who came out and shot a 58. Not too long after it opened. I mean, so the greens are fun, and there's a lot of challenge in the greens, but a really long hitter can eat that place up. The fairways are 45 yards wide. It's gettable if you're hitting the ball well. And but by the same token, that 6,200 is more than enough for most golfers, and and so you have to find something to challenge it. Again, we didn't want to overwhelm the golf course with bunkers. We had 25 bunkers out there, strategically placed. My bunker philosophy on any project is, if you're going to put a bunker in, because bunkers are expensive. They're expensive to build. They're expensive to maintain. So it needs to be impactful. And
Hmm.
so the ones that we did add are very much in play, and it may be maybe just a visual thing sometimes. Sometimes there's a little bit of land behind the bunker that you might not be able to see. Or on our third hole, for example, par five, there's a bunker short right and a bunker long left in the fairway, and we tried to make those bunkers so that it looks like there's not much land in between them. So playing little mind games and things like that with them.
Hmm.
But the bunkers that we were going to put in, like, we want people to play in them. And that's always been my bunker philosophy. And I think, bunkers are overused a lot of times. If you're working in sand, it's like, okay, that makes sense. There should be more sand. But, a lot
Yeah.
of U.S. parkland golf courses are immensely overbunkered, in my opinion. And, I'd love to see, 30 to 40. I think that's probably the max you really need. Just put them in the right places. And I don't think you need necessarily 100 bunkers on a U.S. parkland golf course. And there's a lot of the Golden Age guys use bunkers a lot too. So I'm not, this is not a new phenomenon by any means. But for me, at least personally, I love, just the judicious use of sand, and if you're going to put it in there, make it impactful to the golfer. But other than that, like, let's let the ball move on the ground.
And I think you see that. I mean, you go back to what Tom Simpson wrote. Kind of the well, what he would describe, I guess, is like strategic minimalism,
Mm,
where effectively what you're trying to do is make sure that every element on that golf hole plays a role, and then if you have it there, it's performing some sort of a function. And
mm,
he kind of thought that a perfectly designed golf hole, if you had one hazard, that it would dominate the play, you know, from the tee, perhaps second shot on a par five, and then the green shot into the green. So one hazard performing a role, multiple roles on that golf hole,
mm,
and uh, maybe there is that now. We've got the ability to make some massive changes when it comes to most sites with modern technology and equipment. But
mm.
sometimes the ability to do those things, that just because you can doesn't mean you should. Um,
True.
um, and to your point too, like when we think about the length of golf courses, I remember sitting with one well-known architect discussing things with the committee, and they said, "Well, we'd like it more to be a test." And they said, "Well, there's no way that we could get. There's very few golf courses that could ever be built now to truly test a proper tour player."
Mm,
So I said, "Well, what do you think we should do?" And they said, "Just if someone breaks 60 on your golf course, just applaud them as they walk up the 18th, because that's still like pretty impressive, for anyone to go
yeah.
around unless it, and, and that's the thing. But even for a player that shoots 58, who had more fun? Basically, someone turning every par four into a drive and a pitch, or the average golfer really enjoying their time around Park Mammoth.
Hmm.
There's another side to golf other than just turning in scorecards. One of the big things about golf is just enjoying yourself. And to your point about maybe this ties back into these short courses or putting courses that we start to see more and more, is that the golf is about that. For the average player, they're not looking to get beat up. Like in the 1990s, perhaps that's what it was about. The more difficult, the better. But we're getting to the point now where people are saying, "Look, I just want to go and enjoy myself," and this gives them a good
Hmm.
opportunity to do that. So
Yeah,
when we
there's
think
so
about
so
park,
many
yeah,
places. So many places set themselves up for that 1 week a year, or maybe 2 weeks a year when they're hosting a major event, and they're not thinking about the other 50. And it's kind of sad to see that, in my opinion. I see a lot of clubs who are vying for and want to host tournaments and want to stay relevant in the professional game, that are making decisions that are only based on that 1 week and aren't based on the other 51. Hopefully, we'll see less of that.
yeah, and that obviously these little projects that are gaining like quite a lot of traction, like Park Mammoth being a really good example. Take an existing golf course, significant investment, of course, but relatively minor, if you will.
Mhm.
Tremendous amounts of change, but actually the routing that was there more or less stayed the same. A couple of tweaks and adjustments, new greens, new presentation, and all of a sudden, you've got a golf course that's making waves with some of the best in the state, uh,
Mhm.
and actually it's just a little bit north of some pretty major golfing markets,
Yeah.
um, which is a pretty cool thing. Looking at some of the photos too, it looks like you've got quite a lot of like what would look to be some of the natural vegetation that you brought in, offering
Hmm.
really nice textures, wide fairways, especially on the type of topography that you have. Um, I mean, I think I could probably still lose some balls out there,
There,
depending
there's a
on
few
where I
spots. There's a
went.
few spots maybe where the native grass gets a little close to play. Again, we didn't want it to just be one height of cut out there. I think that mid level height is so important. That human scale, kind of that third dimension. You got all the turf grass that's being mowed. From an eighth of an inch up to 3 inches, let's say, with rough, and then you've got trees that are 60, 80 feet in the air, but like what's in between that? And I just
Mhm.
really love that kind of that third level texture that you get from native grasses. And of course it makes it a little easier too. They mow it once a year out there. um, so that's 20 acres of turf that they're not having to maintain that they would have before, and they're not having to mow around trees and weed eat around trees as frequently. And so a big part of our program too was not just creating a fun golf course, but creating a golf course that they can maintain and break even on, right? Because Mr. Chandler has standards that he wants to meet agronomically, And when you know you can only charge a certain amount of money, then you've got to be a little bit flexible in how you get there.
So, with that in mind, maybe we'll definitely have individuals that are listening to this that will be thinking about their own golf clubs, and perhaps some of the work that's being done. But that's always a really good point to make, is that a good architect will be thinking not just how to design, build, shape, and then grow in and then present, but also what it would take to continue to make it look and play the same way the day that they left on into the future, and perhaps improve.
Mm.
So we talked a little bit about minimal amounts of bunkers, 30 to 40, you said, for an 18-hole golf course. Um, I think you're right. The amount of bunkers on golf courses, the average golfer doesn't visit as many bunkers as they perhaps think. There's no way that you're
Mm.
visiting all of those all the way around, no matter how good or how poor you are,
Mm.
and how well they've been placed. That's just the nature of golf. We're incredibly erratic for the most part, even if we are
Yeah.
better golfers. um, so we're not going to visit them all, but extremely resource heavy to build and maintain. So, how? What are some of the other things that you guys have done that just helps maintain those budgets? So, minimal amount of bunkers. Obviously, a lot of the trees have been removed, so there's not a lot of time being spent gathering leaves, especially with the change of the
Mhm.
seasons. But what else perhaps is there that maybe people that have golf courses that are, they don't have the ability to charge extortionate green fees or have ultra elite memberships? What can they do to basically make it cost effective?
Yeah, so not only the first thing that comes to mind is not only the amount of bunkers that we put in there, but what are they? What style are they? And we wanted to go with a flat bottom bunker,
Hmm.
steep grass faces. But what we did is on a lot of the fairway bunkers, we made those fescue, so they're not mowing those bunker faces frequently. So that takes out a lot of the handwork, a lot of the fly mowing and things like that. And so the greenside bunkers are mowed tight, and yeah, a lot of those have to be fly mowed. So again, we were trying to be judicious, trying to only use bunkers where we felt like we needed them, really felt like where they should be. And so the fairway, every bunker out there is flat bottom. We didn't use a liner. We just put a sod liner in the bottom of the bunker.
Brilliant.
So no fancy liner system out there. Um, which obviously those are effective a lot of times, especially if you got flash sand bunkers. Absolutely, I use those products all the time. But at Park Mammoth, just didn't feel like we needed them, And so we decided, let's go flat bottom bunkers. We want the bunkers to be maintainable, so they're going to be big enough that you can get a sand pro in them. They're not having to hand rake
Hmm.
all these bunkers every day. There's a few that they have to, but for the most part, you can get a sand pro in them. Easy access is another thing. Making sure on one side of the bunker you can always the golfers can get in and out simply. Flat entry into the bunker. That way they're not climbing bunker faces and collapsing them, things like
Collapsing
that,
them.
and creating more maintenance. Again, if you're going to do an irrigation system, just just bite the bullet and replace the system. And a lot of clubs I see are doing these kind of stopgap measures where they'll fix a couple of leaks this year and might do one greens loop, but then their maintenance staff is still having to fix irrigation problems. Every year they're spending time and resources doing that. And when you're having to fix things, then you're not maintaining the golf course. You're not focused on the things you need to be focused on. So, we were fortunate out there that, when we got there, only the greens were irrigated. The fairways were not. It was basically a meadow. It was a pasture. It was pasture golf. What Park Mammoth was, and that wasn't going to cut it anymore for the new owner. And so we spent a little extra money on the front end, put in the brand new irrigation system though, and it's really helped the maintenance staff because they're not having to deal with all these leaks, and they're not having to to fix things all the time. They can focus their time and attention on the things that matter, which is the greens and the surrounds.
Hmm. Yeah, we have a saying over here called, like pound wise, penny foolish, or
Mm.
yeah, penny wise, pound foolish. That's right. Get it the right way around.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
where
that
we're,
sounds right.
we're
Yeah.
we're yeah, we're worried about the cents, but we're spending dollars. Um, so the point being, to your point, sometimes you need to take a good hard look about where the time and money is going, the resources into these things. But yeah, it's a good observation that these really important things, concentrate on those, and perhaps some of the time and cost savings that you have in other areas, it frees you up to do a little bit more on the details that matter. Yeah,
Hmm.
very cool. So, I mean, it's been great chatting with you today. It's one of those things that as golf continues to evolve, I think maybe in America, especially with new administration coming in, have to see how legislation affects designing, building golf courses. Stateside, it seems like there's no let up with the amount of golf that's being built.
Yeah.
Texas and Florida, especially, absolutely booming.
Hmm.
And then you have these golf destinations that seem to be just like every couple of years, there seems to be another one popping up. Where in the UK, it's quite difficult. It's an established market with a lot and lot of golf courses. Um, and a lot of new builds not being brought online. That being
Hmm.
said, we're looking forward to Cabot Highlands, Tom Doak's new course that Clyde Johnson's
Yeah.
just helped get off the ground. There'll be preview play this year, and then Trump International. So the second
Hmm.
course there, perhaps not unsurprisingly, they're very bullish on what they think they have. Um, so we'll just have to wait and see whether it meets the hype. But it sounds like it's going to be an interesting golf course nonetheless, to balance them off, the 36 hole venue there. Uh, and then Coolings, jury's still out whether that gets
Hmm.
through final approval up near Dornoch. So it's not to say that there isn't brand new golf courses, but a lot of these have taken many years, if not decades, to try and jump through all the hoops. Where if golf courses are already sanctioned, if we already have land set aside for them, perhaps it's the opportunity for individuals or perhaps new architects to take a look with fresh eyes on the potential that a lot of these sites have. And that's one thing that you've
Hmm.
done stateside, and it shows that it can work. So yeah, really, really interesting chatting with you, Brian. And what's so Jekyll Island? That's one that we spoke about early on. Um, and then anything else in the pipeline that we should be looking out for from Brian Ross?
Yeah. Well, Jekyll Island's the big one. I think, Park Mammoth pushed me up a level quicker than I probably anticipated. And just in terms of getting work. And I've gotten multiple projects already solely because of Park Mammoth. I mean, that was the number one thing mentioned and when being hired. And that's great. I'm glad that I was able to make that impact with my first real, major project. And that got us Jekyll Island. And Jekyll's so exciting because again, it's part restoration, it's part new course. It's a beautiful setting in a beautiful part of the country. You've got these dramatic 300, 400-year-old live oaks draped in Spanish moss. You've got the pine forest. It's pure sand. And you've got 30 and 40-foot dunes in places as we get out closer to the ocean. So it's just a really fun piece of ground to work on. It's so varied and so unique. And I think it's going to take golfers on a really fun journey. And so we kicked off there in October, hoping to reopen in October of this year, 2025.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that Jekyll will push the boundaries on what a public municipal golf course can be. Um, I think there's been a few exciting projects in the U.S. in the last decade. Thinking about places like Memorial Park in Houston, um, the park in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, unfortunately, a lot of times it seems to be that the thinking is, oh, it's a public golfer, it's the municipal golfer. We can't give them all that you might see at a private club. And I disagree with that wholeheartedly. I think they should be getting the same experience and at a place like Park Mammoth or a place like Jekyll Island that you can get it at Sea Island across the way, or that you can get at Seminole or
Mm-hmm.
any type of place like that. And so that's what we're pushing for, at Jekyll Island, is to be able to give the public golfer an experience with Walter Travis, because most of his courses aren't accessible to every golfer, but Jekyll
Yeah.
will be. And so obviously we're very excited to be able to introduce Walter Travis to the public American golfer, because that's what he was. He was an amateur golfer, And so we're excited for that. And also working at Starkey Park, which is a municipal golf course in Seguin, Texas, right now, just south of Austin. I kind of briefly mentioned that one earlier as well. That's it was 9 holes from John Breedemus in the 1930s, and Breedemus designed Colonial Country Club. He did the original Memorial Park in Houston. So he was kind of the golden age guy in Texas. Um, not as famous as many of his peers, but he did really good work. And it's in a beautiful little pecan grove down on the river, and it's a really interesting golf course. Kind of exact same timeline as at Jekyll Island right now. We're looking to reopen by October this year, and that's a major renovation, not a rerouting by any means. We're just basically rebuilding everything, making some more interesting green complexes and change the bunker strategy a little bit, but it'll still be the same golf course that people are used to seeing. And excited to get that one back online too. And then I've got a couple of clubs that I'm just consulting with, planning some restoration work in Kentucky and Ohio right now, and still just kind of looking for the next big one.
Brilliant. Yeah, looking forward to Jekyll Island. That's one that's certainly on the map. Looking at some of the old photos, exciting property and exciting plans. So, especially from your point of view, like you say, the opportunity, it's restoration, renovation work. It's still difficult to get projects over the line. Especially when you're dealing with committees and all the rest of it. It's still a complicated process. So until it's done, it's not done.
Certainly.
But to be able to have the opportunity to do some new build stuff, some restoration, and a bit of renovation all in one project is really exciting for you. So we're excited to see and see how that project goes. So yeah, no, that's great. Really appreciate your time, Brian. Thank you so much for talking us through Park Mammoth, how that worked, why it worked, and glad to see it debut in our lists. I think currently we have it at 7 in state. But that certainly will be one to watch for and see if it continues to rise as more and more of our panelists get out to see that. So that's one to watch for. And then of course Jekyll Island in the state of Georgia. So we'll see how that one goes as well.
Yeah, I fully expect Jekyll to make a rise in a couple of years. Hopefully, we can redo this conversation. We'll be talking a little bit more about Jekyll. I have high hopes. I'm very optimistic.
Well, you heard it here first. Jekyll Island's definitely one to watch for. If you want to see some of the photos, rossgolfarchitects.com, hit the project page there. I see some really stunning vintage photographs of some of the open sand and the dunes. Really cool property. And you even see the master plan there too for Great Dunes course at Jekyll Island Golf Club with the master plan. But if you look at some of those photos, if you didn't tell me it was Jekyll Island, I probably would have guessed that it would have been Machrihanish in Scotland. So there's definitely some similarities between a couple of the photographs that you see online and some of the ones that we've seen which is a pretty heady company. Anytime you can mention a golf course in the same breath as Machrihanish, that's pretty good going.
I will take that as a compliment. Yeah, we were very fortunate that they have a really beautiful archive there on the island, and it has so many old ground level photographs from when the golf course first opened, and unfortunately there were 9 other holes from Travis that were even closer to the ocean that were lost in the early 1950s to a storm, and they just never rebuilt. And but we're doing our best to take those and use them as inspiration for the new work as well. It was an amazing looking golf course. I could imagine trying to play that in the 20s with the equipment that they had. But yeah, we're excited to kind of introduce that look and that design style again to the everyday golfer, to the public golfer.
I think it's so good, and like you said, I mean, good golf design that doesn't necessarily have to be in the sole possession of those that can afford an elite country club membership.
Agreed.
And in fact, sometimes good golf design is, if you don't have access or you can't pay for all the bells and whistles, sub-air systems and liners and all the bunkers and et cetera, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're leaving anything on the table. Good golf can be had and enjoyed. I think for most of our listeners, especially here in the UK, that they'll know that and understand that, because you can go to courses like Broya, Askernesh, even inland mentioned having some of the common land golf courses that, still got livestock cut in the fairways.
Yeah.
And it works really, really well. So, but perhaps that's a relatively new or newly reintroduced concept to some of the individuals stateside, or perhaps in more non-traditional golfing markets. So, yeah, really good talking with you. And we look forward to revisiting or perhaps getting some updates on Jekyll Island as we go through 2025. And look forward to talking to you more.
All right. Thanks so much, Jasper. That was a lot of fun.